Welcome to our webinar for July, Dynamic Assessment, the new gold standard. If you're familiar with us, we have been talking about dynamic assessment for a while, but we want to really reinforce this topic as the diamond is out, as the concept of dynamic assessment is becoming more prevalent. Well, let's get into it. I am Christy Jones. I am a dissemination and implementation specialist, which is a fancy way to say that I have the privilege of helping wonderful individuals like you learn more about the different products that we have at LDG and how to implement them in your practice, your school, your district, and be able to support that implementation, as well as disseminate any research that we have behind it. On with me is our wonderful Director of Dissemination and Implementation Programs, Dr. Megan Kirby. She will be monitoring some of the chat and our Q&A. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to throw them in the Q&A or to put them in the chat. She'll be monitoring them, and then I will have times throughout this presentation where I will check in and answer some questions live. Okay, so without further ado, let's get to it, shall we? So our agenda for today, I'm going to go over some brief introductions as to our actual team at Language Dynamics Group. We are a slowly growing team, so that's exciting. And then we'll go into the background of dynamic assessment as a whole, why it's relevant, why we're even interested in it. And then our application as a company, how we applied this into a product, and we'll be focusing on the actual diamond and some of the methods, as well as some of the statistics behind it. Then we'll finish up with a quick recap and we'll go into a Q&A. So I have a feeling this will go by pretty fast. Okay. So let's talk about the lovely people of LDG. This is our team. We are about to gain another. She doesn't start till August. The next time you see our slide here, we'll have another team member. But for now, this is our team as a whole. We have Roger and Karen and their wonderful children. They take care of our warehouse. So if you have received any products, they're the ones that got it to you. Roger's also our wonderful financial guy. They're a great family. Hopefully you know and love Dr. Douglas Peterson, Dr. Trina Spencer. They are the reasons that we're all here. They are the co-authors behind all of the wonderful products and the research that we're able to talk about here in these webinars, and we are very grateful for them. Already talked to you about Dr. Megan Kirby. She is here. She is absolutely fantastic. She can answer any and all dissemination and implementation questions, how to integrate this, whether it's in a practice or on a state education line. She is really, really fantastic and has done some awesome research. Here we have Cameron Leddit. She does a lot of our product and research development for each of our products and any ongoing studies that we have going on. She's absolutely brilliant. This is, sorry, Karen Kathy Konishi, sorry. She is our kind of office manager. She helps a lot with customer relations. She's such a delight. Olivia Peterson here is Dr. Peterson's wife. If you see anything visually through our products or on our website, she's the one behind the designs. We are very grateful for her and her talents in that. So Shane is our sales guy. So if you have anything you're wanting to order, this is who you're going to be talking to. And finally, the lovely Mike. Mike is the one who really keeps this machine running. He kind of has his hand in all of the operational things behind LDG and making sure that this business is floating. So this is everyone. We are not a very big team, but we have grown a lot in the last few years. So this is us. And if you ever wonder why sometimes it takes us a while to get research or products out there, it's because all of us are working on everything all the time. It feels like we are working hard, but we love what we do, and we're really excited to share it with you. Okay, now let's get to the reason why we're here. Let's talk about dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment has been something that's been in research for decades now, but it seems to be getting a lot more prevalence now that we're seeing more assessments incorporating it. But what is the main difference? Most assessments, pretty much all of them, are static assessments. These are assessments that we use in an SLP practice, in a classroom. This is what is often used to understand if a child knows something, and it is measuring what a child currently knows. It's what they know at a certain point in time. You ask the question, you get the answer, and that's that. They either have it or they don't. This is what we call assessing the product. What is the product? Now that we've gone through some processes in the classroom, has this individual learned the product of those lessons? Dynamic assessment, on the other hand, doesn't look at the product, but rather the process. It is measuring a child's potential to learn something new. So rather than just saying, do you know this or do you not? It's, can you learn this? What is your capacity to learn this particular thing? Do you have difficulty with the learning process, which will make the product unattainable? Or how can we get you to the product by improving your learning process? This is super, super vital, especially as we are working with populations with learning disabilities, right? Okay. So methods of dynamic assessment. There are three key methods. One is mediated learning. Second is testing the limits. And third is graduated prompting. Now, I'm going to spend the bulk of our presentation focusing on mediated learning. That's what we mainly use in the Diamond. But testing the limits and graduated prompting are both, they're both really important. Testing limits we utilize a lot in Cubed. If you're familiar with the phonemic awareness or phoneme manipulation tasks, it utilizes testing the limits. And graduated prompting is something that we do utilize in Diamond. It's something that's used in actually a lot of our products, but that is also very essential. But mainly we'll be focusing on mediated learning. So mediated learning and learning potential. Oh no, I don't know why my pictures. Oh no, it's showing up here. Okay, sorry, my speaker notes are not showing my image, so I'm glad that it's actually showing up for you. So mediated learning and learning potential. What are we talking about here? This is where we're actually doing that deep dive into the process of a child's learning. We're going to look at this through a test, teach, retest method. So we're going to test, almost basically give them a static test. We're going to test them on a particular skill or a target that we're wanting to investigate and see what they currently know. Then we're going to teach. We're going to go through the process of teaching them how to do this skill, show them the strategies, have them say it out loud, repeat what you're saying as the examiner, and have that dialogue. And after this teaching phase, we'll go to a retest. And with that retest, we're going to test on the same targets or maybe a variation of those targets that you taught. And from there, you'll be able to see if any of those strategies that they learned were generalized over this teaching phase. Did they actually learn something? Was the learning process effective for them? There's a very huge emphasis here on cognition. We're not just seeing if they can remember some simple fact. We're talking about attention as well as memory, executive functioning, inferencing, metalinguistics, and the application of each of those strategies. So it's evaluating a lot more than just this simple product, this fact, this knowledge piece. It's the whole process of the brain working, all of the elements of cognition that work together to help in the learning process. Oh, and with that, sorry, I just want to emphasize this. So with a lot of our mediated learning type assessments, they are going to come with a modifiability rating. Modifiability is where we're actually going to give a specific score to that learning process. You're going to evaluate as the examiner, as the clinician, how was this learning process for the learner? Was it really difficult for them or was it easy? Were they frustrated or were they confident? Did the prompts seem to help or did they seem just as lost, even with your help along the way? What was their rate of learning? Did it seem to be fast paced or were they stuck on one thing after another? This whole opportunity to score the learning process is going to give you so much information, especially when we're talking about things like diagnosing language disorders and dyslexia, where there's an issue with learning, right? We really, really want to give a score to that. And this is the only opportunity is through dynamic assessment to be able to give an actual score to something like the learning process. Now, our other two that we have are testing the limits and graduated prompting. So we're just going to talk about these briefly. But testing the limits is where you're going to start with the most difficult target. So if we're thinking about the phonemic awareness subtest, we start with the most difficult target. There's 4 total, and they get easier as you go. So if the first target is successful and the learner accomplishes that first task, you can discontinue the entire test because we already know if they have the most difficult one, the rest of them should be there. Those should be solid because you have to have those in place in order to get that most complex target. If, however, it's unsuccessful, you're going to continue to the next target and progressively go until it seems like that target is actually successful. And this is where you're able to actually identify the zone of proximal development. Where is our learner actually struggling? What is the most complex level they're able to perform at? Let's start there. Let's do intervention there. Let's pick up in the classroom or in the clinic right there and move upwards. So it's able to really identify that very easily. Next would be graduated prompting. So this is all dependent on the child's need for prompting. If they are making a lot of errors, that means they're going to need a lot of prompting. But these prompts are meant to support the learning process, but they're never meant to just stay there forever. As we're going through intervention or as you're going through a teaching phase, as you're going through this process of learning, prompts are going to gradually be faded out as the learner ends up being more successful in their performance. So we don't just say, okay, this is the prompt we're going to give every single time, no matter what. It's only if an error is made. We help make the prompt to guide that learner to the correct response, and then we continue. And if they start doing it independently, there's no need for that prompt anymore. We can graduate them from that prompting. So there are 3 different methods. We've got the mediated learning or learning potential, testing the limits, and graduated prompting. Okay, next, let's talk about what dynamic assessment is actually based on. This is based on 2 particular theories. First, we have Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. This is where we're talking about the importance of measuring learning within the actual zone of proximal development. And this is using scaffolding that's provided by the adult or the examiner in the room. So that is a huge portion of dynamic assessment. On the other side, it's Feuerstein's theory of mediated learning experiences. This is where we're observing how the child responds. So in Vygotsky's, we're talking about the zone of proximal development, making sure that we are measuring that learning here. But then Feuerstein's is looking at how does the child respond to that learning? Now that we're learning in that right zone, how are they responding within that zone? Is this helping? So we're responding to the teaching interactions. We're assessing the child's ability to learn throughout that entire instructional process. This is where we're looking at those modifiability scores, right? Like I just showed you. We're looking at that rating. We're considering how easy or difficult it was for that particular child to learn and gain new knowledge through certain learning strategies that we're teaching. So now that we know what these things are, why is dynamic assessment even important? What's the real deal here? Why should we even care? There's so many different assessments out there, right? Well, I really like these two definitions here. First, people with developmental learning language disorder have significant difficulty learning, understanding, and using spoken language. Then the next one's on dyslexia. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So, as you can see in the bolded terms, the emphasis is on the learning. They are both learning disorders. One is a difficulty in learning language, and another is an emphasis on a difficulty in learning decoding. If we have these 2 disorders that really emphasize a difficulty in the learning process, shouldn't we actually assess the learning rather than just the product of, okay, have you comprehended this? No, can you learn to comprehend this? Hey, can you decode this? How about can you learn to decode this with appropriate instruction and supports? If not, then we can have greater confidence that an actual disorder or risk for a disorder is present. So on top of that, what are some of our benefits of dynamic assessment? And a lot of this is geared towards the actual diamond in and of itself. But dynamic assessment is able to more accurately predict. And it also goes into this bias reduction. The reason why it's more accurate is because there is less bias towards culturally and linguistically diverse populations. Because we are giving these students an opportunity to learn and we're instructing, it's really breaking those barriers that can sometimes come with a student who speaks a different language at home. We're not just giving them obscure tasks to perform. It's let's talk about this, let's teach this, let's learn this together. And that will more accurately determine between a difference, like speaking in another language at home, versus an actual disorder. And that eliminates that ability, or a lot of other tests who are static do not accurately identify those students. They might take a student who speaks another language at home and says they have a disorder, when in all reality, maybe they just need more English language instruction, more English language support, rather than actual comprehension or decoding deficits. Additionally, early identification. Because this is on the learning process, we don't have to wait until a certain level of instruction has been achieved. We can start with younger children and determine if they have the potential to learn things and be able to find those difficulties early rather than just waiting for them to fail. That is such a prevalent problem right now where a lot of systems wait for a few years of evidence for a child to fail, or something else that just completely disadvantages the child. We want to identify them early so that they're not just failing year after year and we're waiting until fourth, fifth grade, maybe even beyond that to actually begin intervention. Early identification means early intervention, which gives a lot more strategies for that student. The other thing is efficiency. The diamond in particular is very efficient in its subtests. It takes anywhere around 10 to 15 minutes to administer in its full battery, and it has the potential to do so much. Diagnosing both language disorder and dyslexia is a really, really big deal. And it can be used as a screener as well. But efficiency is such a need, especially for you SLPs out there, or if you're any type of specialization where you have a massive caseload and you're dealing with a lot, efficiency means a lot. Okay, so our first code word today is mediated learning. Please jot this down. I am going to show a QR code at the end that you'll need to go into and fill out. And it's going to ask you to fill in the two code words, mediated learning and our second one. If you actually have those in there, then that will be enough to get you the certificate of completion to give you credit for participating in our webinar. So make sure you jot this down. Mediated learning is our code word. Okay. I'm going to double check our Q&A really quick. Okay, we've got a few questions here in the Q&A, so I will check into that really quick. So Beck asked, how does the diamond differ from a screener as opposed to assessment when it doesn't provide a definitive result of dyslexia language disorder, but just says probability? So it actually is a diagnostic assessment. The diamond can be modified to be a screener and given to a whole population, but the actual assessment is diagnostic. So it does give you determination on if the student, it's determined as a language learning or decoding learning disorder. But of course, we always promote the use of more than one assessment, right? We never want to just rely on one thing for diagnosis, but yeah, so it is a diagnostic assessment. Okay, let me read through this. Is this available and would it be helpful to use with bilingual students? Yes, I will be talking about that in a minute. So Diamond is available. You can use it with bilingual students. We will be touching on that soon. It's exciting. Okay, so looking through Beck's other question, with the approach of starting with this hardest type of question first, I think it is important to realize that just with starting with easier and then cutting off before the trickier questions, there are many neurodivergent people have spiky or uneven cognitive profiles. So sometimes they can do the harder task, but have impacting gaps at the potentially viewed easier level? Yes. So they might be more top-down learners rather than bottom-up. So my question is, how does the diamond really help us to really know and be sure that if they do the harder tasks, that they, okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So the diamond isn't using that testing the limits approach. We're not starting with some harder task and then going lower. That's just a method of dynamic assessment that can be used. Diamond is actually looking at that learning process. So we're not going to only do the hardest one and then tap out there. Especially in the decoding one, we have our learners go through all of the decoding targets and figure out which one was the hardest for them, um, and goes from there. Oh yes, Megan, did you have something to add to that? It notified me. If not, that's okay. Okay.
No, I don't. I was just saying that you were answering it live. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, just gave me a notice, but okay, perfect. Yeah, but great question. Hopefully that helps. That helps out. And we'll look at this a little more and what the diamond actually does with its subtest, so you have a reference of what we're even talking about here. Great questions. I'm loving it. Keep it up. Okay, so let's talk about the diamond in particular. We've been cluing into it, but now this is going to be purely on the diamond. We're going to start by looking at a study that was done. I'm one of the co-authors on it. And this was some of our preliminary research that was published on the diamond. The diamond is based on even more research than this, but I want to start at the basics just so you can understand how much growth we've had and how much success even just some of the early stages of the diamond had before it became to where it is now. So we'll look at this article. It's accurately identifying language disorder in school-age children using dynamic assessment of narrative language. So this one's just focusing on one of the subtests of the diamond. But once I talk about data later on, it'll be the whole battery of it. All right. So background. We're talking about how several studies had actually demonstrated that dynamic assessment can be less biased as opposed to static assessment for identifying language disorder in a diverse school age population. But not all of these studies actually had a large sample size. Most of them were pretty small. Sometimes it was single to just a handful of students, and it's not very adequate for actually developing psychometric research. You need a large sample size from that. So we generated a few research questions and decided to go at it and get a very large sample size. We wanted to know, to what extent do age, gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, multilingualism, limited English language proficiency, or school location actually affects modifiability ratings. And again, modifiability is what we're talking about when we're looking at what was the learning score, their ability to learn, that potential to learn, the ease to learn, or difficulty. That's the modifiability rating. Second, what is the sensitivity? So the ability to accurately identify who does have a disorder, and specificity, the ability to accurately identify who doesn't have a disorder. So what's the sensitivity and specificity of the individual and combined dynamic assessment variables? And finally, what are the specific cut points for the dynamic assessment variables to be able to obtain the best combination of sensitivity and specificity by grade? So we're looking at a lot of data here. Our participants included 634 diverse first through fifth grade students, both with and without language disorder. This particular study was done in just this region of the United States, but the diamond is a lot more representative. This was, like I said, just our preliminary research. What we did was we gave the dynamic assessment of narrative language to every student, and students were confirmed as having an actual language disorder using a few different sources of data. Some were an IEP, showing teacher-parent concern, factors like that. And the research assistants were all blind as to which students were confirmed as having a language disorder. I can testify to that because I was one of those. We found that the dynamic assessment of narrative language had greater than 90% sensitivity and specificity, which was really high. This accuracy, the validity, the reliability is really high in accurately identifying those who do and don't have a language disorder. The modifiability scores were not meaningfully different across different demographic groups. So regardless of all of those demographic variables we mentioned in the research question, socioeconomic status, not English language proficiency, multilingualism, All those things did not actually impact modifiability, which is amazing. That's showing that we can actually make this equitable. We can even the playing field and assess all of these students with the same test, regardless of these different factors. So the assessment was not biased. Takeaways: the dynamic assessment of narrative language can actually accurately identify for language disorder across different demographic groups. This is providing less biased classification than actual traditional and static forms of assessment. So this is a really big deal. Okay, I see we have a Q&A. Let me check. What did those with previously identified language disorders previously assessed on? I don't remember right off the top of my head. We looked at a battery of assessments since this was on different regions. I know some, not all of them use the exact same assessment, but if you want more details as to the actual study, email me. I'll have my email at the end and I can pull this out. The study was done a while ago, but yeah, I can dig into that for you and let you know which assessments. I know the self was one of them. The TILS, I believe, was one of them. But it wasn't all the same. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Beck. So now that we have some of this preliminary information, let's talk about what the diamond is. What are the purposes? We have three key purposes. It's not just diagnosis. First, we do want to identify language learning disorder, or DLD, and decoding learning disorder, dyslexia. That is the first key purpose. Second, we want to identify strengths and weaknesses. That way, we're not just having a diagnosis, we actually have targets for instruction and intervention. Which is then, it's going to identify those instructional targets. So where are the strengths and weaknesses and what can we work on? Those are the three key purposes of the diamond. And that is accomplished through the four key subtests of the diamond. There are four individual sections that we utilize to help make these determinations. First is the dynamic assessment of narrative discourse. This is where we talk about a brief narrative story that has pictures and icons. We read the story with the child. They have the opportunity to retell the story, and you teach them how to tell every part of the story with the right type of language and vocabulary. And you do this with visual stimulants, then you gradually take away the visual stimulants, and then you go into a post-test where you see if any of those strategies you taught generalized to a brand new story, and they retell it independently. Next is the dynamic assessment of inferential word learning. There are a few very brief narratives that have a nonsense word embedded somewhere in the story with contextual clues to help the learner infer the meaning of this new nonsense word. They are given the opportunity to tell you what they think the word means after you read through the story together. And if they get it wrong, you go through a teaching phase. You teach them how to infer the meaning of new words. You call out the information from the story that gave you clues about what the word could mean, and you talk about that process. And then you give them the opportunity to try again with a new story. Then we have the dynamic assessment of decoding. This is really, really nice, especially for our for kindergarten students. You can utilize this, and then first grade through eighth grade, they're treated a little differently. Kinder, we just do one syllable type, and they look at closed syllables and they read them. They're all nonsense words, and we go through a teaching phase if they don't have them completely accurate in the pretest. For first through eighth grade students or kids up to 14 and a half years old, we're going to have them read 6 different syllable types, and they all have 6 targets each. Whichever of those targets they perform the worst on, they don't have the lowest rate of success on any of those targets, we're going to go to the teaching phase for that particular target. We'll teach them how to read those words, how to decode, what the strategies are. And then we go to a post-test to evaluate how they did on that process. And finally, we have rapid automatized naming. This is where the learner is given the opportunity to look at a picture of different animals that are of different colors. They have to name the color and the animal. There's 3 different animals, 3 different colors. And this is where we're actually looking into phonological processing, their processing abilities, their automaticity, which is really necessary for decoding ability. So those are our 4 subtests of the diamond. Now, the method that these use are that these diamond subtests use are primarily the mediated learning method. of dynamic assessment. So this is going to be let's test first, then let's teach, then let's retest this process and see how the modifiability was. What was the learning process like for this student? Did they make gains over the process? You do this with language learning, you do it with the decoding learning, as well as that inferencing. Age ranges for this test, yes. So it's going to be kindergarten through 8th grade. I believe it's 5 years old to 14 years and 5 months. Yeah. If I'm wrong on that, Megan, double check me, but I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, those are the age ranges. Yeah. And I'll also put a link, or Megan, if you could drop this link in here, that just takes to our page on the Diamond. That way you will all have the time to be able to see that. I'll actually add that link in the email I send as well. That way you're able to see all of the details of the Diamond, the particular data behind it, the age ranges, things like that. But I want to show a little bit about what a teaching phase can look like on one of the particular subtests of the Diamond and why it is so crucial. So this is a screenshot from just one of the teaching phases from the Diamond. Now, before we even do this, before we even start really taking this in mentally, we told a story. We told a story about a boy who had a sandwich that had stuff on it that he did not like. He was not happy. It's Sam here. Sam had a sandwich with mustard on it. He was not happy about it. So it's a story about how he tries to go about solving this problem about a sandwich with disgusting yellow mustard on it. So we have a stimulus book that has the picture, the illustrations, it has the story grammar icons that you can see here. These are just the first 4 of the story. The story has a lot more. But as the learner starts to retell the story for the first time, you're going to track if they get the actual story grammar elements. If they miss something or it was incomplete, then you're going to ask a clarifying question right away. You don't wait until the story's over. Let's say I was the learner telling the story and I said, so Sam, he was the kitchen and he got really angry. And I'd say, wait, what was he, or like, why was he angry? You know, what was the problem here, right? We're going to go straight to this. What was the problem? So I'm thinking, think of it like as if you were listening for the first time. If I hear that this character is angry, they're in the kitchen and they're angry, I immediately think, why? So we're going to ask that question. What was the problem? And if they get it right, you say, great, we're going to go back to the beginning and I want you to tell the story. Again, remember to tell me the problem. And they're going to start again and go through it. Or if they miss the feeling, he had mustard on his sandwich and so he tried to get it off. And I say, wait, how did he feel? And we have a tier 2 vocabulary word that we want to really emphasize, distraught. He felt distraught. So once we emphasize that, and we say, go back to the problem and remember to tell me the feeling. We go back and do this overcorrection to keep it cohesive with the structure of the story. We don't want to chop up all of these pieces. We want to keep them together and not compromise that story structure. And so there's these different levels of prompts. We can ask a question, and if they don't get that question right, then we're going to give them a strict prompt that they repeat. When he saw the mustard, he was distraught. Now you say that, and they repeat it. Having this repetition helps them to not just hear it, but actually saying it helps solidify it more cognitively. And you're able to talk about this whole learning process. And then you go back and maintain that cohesion of the actual story. Okay, yeah, Beck was talking about the rapid naming part is good. Yeah, for some students with speech disorders, we understand that's going to be something that's noted for. There is a section in the Diamond that you can account for other extenuating factors that might impede that process. But yeah, so like the BL blend is not very easily produced for some kids. So that's something that you will just want to ensure for, but there's also different cut points for different ages. We don't expect the same level of performance across those different ages, so that is expected for it to be less productive for those younger kids than the older ones. Okay, so this is our method here. Now, After we go through this teaching phase, we're going to do this with the pictures and the icons, and then we're going to give them the opportunity to tell the story again, but only with the icons. So we're fading those visual prompts. We only have the icons, and we'll do this exact process again. Same prompts, same story, everything. Now, once that is done, you want to go ahead and do our modifiability scales. This is just some of the scales that you look at. But behavior scales, we're going to look from a score of a 0 to 4, how they're doing on each of these targets. So first, attention and memory. A 4 is going to be very few verbal prompts. They did not need much during that step 2, that second teaching phase. It seemed that the first teaching phase to the second teaching phase, they had gains. The prompts started to cross over and they were attentive and focused, whereas a 0 is going to be many verbal prompts were needed and they might have been distracted or very difficult to refocus to the task at hand. Response to prompts. A 4 means good response. It means the child is responding to those prompts, whether it's the visual prompts, the verbal prompts. It seems to be clicking and they're responding to that. A 0 is going to be not much response to those prompts at all. Degree of transfer. So a high level of degree of transfer, or a score of 4, is going to mean most of the targets that were taught in the teaching phases actually crossed over. So in teaching phase 1, a lot of the prompts that were used crossed over to teaching phase 2, and we didn't need to re-emphasize those same prompts. Like they learned from it. Whereas a 0 is going to be most of those prompts you gave in teaching phase 1 also had to be given in teaching phase 2. You had to do both. Confidence and frustration. A 4 is going to be high. They were very confident, little to no frustration, didn't seem to be timid or anything. They were going at it. Whereas a 0 is going to be more tentative, more unsure, maybe seeking more reassurance, not understanding the task at hand, just being really quiet, or just seeming uncertain, maybe even really frustrated or distressed. And you need to soothe them a lot during the process of the learning. We also have a section at the bottom that looks at complexity scales. We're looking at morphosyntax. We're looking at sentence and vocabulary complexity. Overall, how academically complex is their language? And if we have considerable concerns on the morphosyntax and other grammatical errors, there is a language complexity analysis at the end of the diamond where you can look at the different utterances, you can identify the errors, and actually get a score on their language complexity. That'll help give more targets for instruction as well. Yes, okay, one question. It says that they noticed that, from Selena, notice that there was any proper name for character is allowed. So I'm gonna go back here. Yeah, any proper name for the character is allowed. That is true. Let's elaborate on that. So even though it might not be correct for them to use another name, what we really are concerned about is less the accuracy of the name and more that a character is named. If it's only starting with, oh, so he was in the kitchen and he was making a sandwich. Myself as a listener, I'm gonna think, who's he? Who are we talking about? Like, who's this kid? Is it a kid? Is it an adult? Like, who's the character? Whereas if a name is given, as a listener to a story, if I'm hearing this for the first time, I'm not going to question, are you sure their name is Sam? Or are you sure their name is, whatever name they choose? You're not questioning that as a listener to a story. You're like, oh, okay, this is the character. I can follow. This makes sense, right? It's going to be more clear and concise if they actually use a name, even if it's not the correct one modeled from the story. We want to give credit where credit is due. Okay. Great question. Okay, so yeah, modifiability scales, we are looking at both behavior and we're looking at their sentence complexity. So this is just an example of one of the subtests in the diamond. We don't have enough time to go through all of them. We have other webinars about that, and we have a full diamond training that goes into the nitty-gritty of all of the subtests, how the teaching processes look. But for this example in particular, we use responsiveness scales like this for the dynamic assessment of decoding. as well as the dynamic assessment of inferential word learning. We go through a process of teaching them, and we do a post test, and we evaluate their learning with these behavior scales and modifiability ratings. So this is a staple within the entire diamond, which helps us actually identify if there is a language learning or decoding learning disorder at hand. Okay, we've got another question here. Oh, thanks. You're welcome. Okay. Oh, Beck says, with the vocabulary complexity in the post test, is there a limit on how many technical words we can count as valid in that component? Yeah, so there's space for the words that were actually modeled in the test, or in the actual story for the post test. And then there is a box for you to include more. We don't have endless boxes because there really wasn't a lot of room on there. You can do more. I honestly don't know if there is a numerical limit. I'd actually have to check on that one. But from what I know if they do more than one, we're going to encourage that. We will not punish or hesitate to give credit if a student has really great vocabulary. We love great vocabulary. Okay, I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So if you have the diamond itself in the manual, there is a testing the limits page. I want to say it's on page 87. I might be wrong. Check in the table of contents. But this is on part of the research that we did during the last leg of our research and development for the diamond. We had a wonderful group go take the diamond to Japan and during our field trial. And they were able to assess 149 kindergarten through sixth grade students, all of which were multilingual. So their home languages were not English. Their home languages included anywhere from Japanese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Korean, and Russian, and they all had varying degrees of English language proficiency. So this seems like a really great sample to be field testing this with, right? If we're really claiming that this is not bias towards culturally and linguistically diverse factors, this is the population that's going to prove it. So nearly all of the children completed the entirety of the diamond subtests. And the results indicated 100% sensitivity and 94% specificity. I'm beaming at that. That is just so cool. And there was criteria to determine the presence of a language disorder. They looked at if a special education teacher expressed concerns about the child's language skills and provided evidence supporting a language disorder. And then second is that the child was diagnosed with a language disorder by the SLP. The examiners were completely blind to this data. This data was gathered after the fact. And with all of that, they had 100% accuracy in correctly identifying all children with a disorder. So that's 100% sensitivity, and then 94% accuracy in correctly identifying all the children without the disorder. So that is 94% specificity. I just want to celebrate. That is so cool. So that right there, even though our normative sample for the diamond is only based off of US data, we don't include all of our international data, but we only normed it to show and to prove that our sample doesn't quite, it's not as pertinent that there's so many people from so many places in the sample because the results are consistent regardless. We were able to see that through our research. Okay, so we are concluding now. This is going fast. But I just want to hit this conclusion here. So dynamic assessment, why is this so important? Well, it can really reduce the bias against culturally and linguistically diverse populations, which is going to allow for accurate identification as well as early identification. This is so important for so many regions around the world. I feel like there's not many places left that aren't dealing with some type of diversity in their cultural linguistic differences. And a lot of schools, a lot of practices are seeing this, and they need assessments to accommodate for that, but this can accommodate for all. Disorders of learning, like language and decoding disorders, require the assessment of the learning process. If we're going to try and diagnose these learning disorders, we want to actually assess the learning process to be able to determine this. And finally, The diamond can reliably identify children with a language learning and or decoding learning disorder, so dyslexia or language disorder, regardless of those demographic differences with very high accuracy. As you saw in our Japanese, or not our Japanese, our Japan data that we gathered there. Now, if you do have the diamond, there are a lot of different measures of sensitivity and specificity across regions, across demographic variables that are all outlined in the manual. If you're interested in looking into that, I highly encourage it. Dive into the manual, look at all of those tables, see how it compares, and you'll see that there's a lot of reliability there. It's really, really high. And I invite you to actually take the time to look at that. Okay, this is our second code word. It's modifiability. Please jot this down. So that way when I show the QR code, you can put in our 2 code words. Remember our first one was mediated learning. And so the second one is modifiability. Okay, so that is everything that I have to present to you today off of dynamic assessment and the importance of it. If you have any questions, now is the time if you want to put them in the Q&A section. And I will be sending a few resources in our recap email on Friday. I'm going to include a research synthesis on the diamond so that you can look into some of the research that we have done. If you are interested in learning how to do the diamond, go through the administration and scoring, we have a training for that. It's an asynchronous training done by our lovely Dr. Kirby. I will have a link to that as well as some links to our next few webinars. We have some really exciting ones coming up. Namely, next month, we have another Comprehending Comprehension conversation with Trina and Doug. It's going to be very, very fun. They're always fun to listen to and participate with. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure you find us on Instagram and Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're wanting extra videos, extra walkthroughs. Sometimes we do giveaways on our products. So make sure you find us, all right? Okay, looks like we're getting some questions. All right, what is the approximate time it takes to complete this assessment? Around 10 to 15 minutes. Australian based, how useful will this be in that context? Completely useful. Yeah, it's useful. I mean, since we were able to show that it's useful in such a diverse population in Japan, it'll definitely be applicable and useful to those of you in Australia as well. Okay. Because Trina and Doug love coming to Australia and talking to all the wonderful specialists out there. Okay, another question. Did the research report dynamic assessment itself is more effective for varying levels of bilingualism, i.e. someone who's barely speaking? Yes, okay, yeah. It is on, okay, an MLU of 2 and a WIDA score of, Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, 1?
One.
WIDA, yeah, okay, yeah. Yep. So that's all they need. It doesn't matter how long they've been exposed, as long as they hit the MLU of 2, WIDA score of 1 in English, you can give this assessment to them.
That WIDA score, basically just think about, does this student or child understand what you are asking them to do? They may not understand, fully comprehend, like let's say they're listening to the story, that they may not have all of the English, but if you were going to teach them, do they understand enough of what is going to be asked of them that they could, when you give a full model, verbal model prompt, do they know that they should repeat after you, right? So those basic directions that are instructional in nature, that's what helps them access the assessment.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, we have another question. Does this connect or provide targets to target with Story Champ's curriculum? Great question. So it doesn't right now give like a specific start with story level, A, B, C, and do this in particular, but the data you are gathering from this and the insight you're gathering from this is going to give you those answers. If you go through this assessment and we notice that the story grammar, the story structure itself is not there, it's very, very weak, and we couldn't learn much, then we want to start with some basic story structure, level A stories, right? Or if the story is more solidified, but maybe we have a higher difficulty with the actual complexity of the language, vocab complexity and sentence complexity. Let's look at the different story levels and lesson plans that can correspond with that. So it won't give you an actual place to start. It's not going to tell you which story level to do. And when to do it, how frequently, but it's still going to tell you what the student can do and what they're capable of learning to do, and you can start from there. So it'll give you at least their zone of proximal development there because of that learning process. Okay, as we finish questions, I'm going to show our QR code. Okay. Any more questions though? Any more questions about the diamond? That dynamic assessment as a whole? If not, you are totally free to go. Thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you next month, our next webinar. And yeah, I'll be sending all of those resources in that email. So no need to wait around for it. Oh, can this be administered in Spanish? We do not recommend translating this into another language. It should only be administered to in English. And there's some information in the manual about that as well.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out, like, you can read the directions, but you cannot translate the actual test content.
Right. Good differentiation. Thanks. Okay, I'll stick around for a few more minutes, but if you have no questions, you are free to go. Thanks again, and we hope to see you soon. Yeah, the QR code was not loading on my end. It's not letting me show you. So I'm going to email that link to actually have you fulfill that certificate. So sorry about that.
Valerie asked, can it be administered remotely? And that would require you to have the stimulus pages, like a doc camera, right? So it might be a little bit difficult, but I do know that there are a couple people that have been doing it just because they live in rural areas here in the United States. And so they've been doing it. Get in touch with us, Valerie, if it is not, like, if it's actually like not an option to do it in person, and I will try to connect you with other people who have been using it remotely. And what I mean by that is email us at training.
Yes. Yeah. Training emails right here. training@languagedynamicsgroup.com. You'll be able to reach me and Megan through that email. Oh, awesome, Tina. That's great.
Tina, email us. Like, and just so that you could say, like, I use it remotely and that's all I need you to say. And then you'll be one of the people that I'll connect Valerie with.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Okay, well, wherever you are, I hope you have a good rest of your day or a good night. For me, it's a good night. For Megan, it's a good night. Yeah.
I know. Wait, wonderful job. Thank you so much for your time, Christy. And yeah, please, so many people joined. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.